The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people had looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. Now they knew. The galaxy was full of life, full of ancient civilizations that had traveled between stars while humans were still learning to make fire. And in the year 2347, humanity was the youngest member of the Galactic Coalition. A newcomer, trying to find its place among giants. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Endurance and watched the blue swirl of hyperspace through the main view screen. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from too many years of hard decisions. The Endurance was not the biggest ship in the human fleet, but she was fast and tough, and her crew was the best Morrison had ever served with. "Commander, we're receiving updated orders from Coalition Command," said Lieutenant Katie Lawson from her station at Tactical. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a mind that could process battle data faster than most computers. Morrison turned to face her. "What do they want now?" "We're being redirected to the Valari system. The Kreth Dominion is moving against their homeworld. Coalition is assembling a defense fleet." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Everyone knew about the Kreth. They were conquerors, plain and simple. Their empire had swallowed dozens of worlds over the past century, and they showed no signs of stopping. The Valari had been members of the Coalition for over 2,000 years. If their homeworld fell, it would be a blow that might break the alliance apart. "How many ships?" Morrison asked. 12 Valari cruisers, 8 Sindari vessels, and 3 human ships including us." Lawson paused. "Intelligence estimates the Kreth fleet at nearly 100 vessels." Chief Engineer Danny Reeves let out a low whistle from his position near the engineering console. He was a big man with hands that could fix anything mechanical and a voice that could be heard across a crowded engine room. "That's not great odds, Commander." "No," Morrison agreed. "It's not. But we go anyway. Set course for the Valari system. Maximum speed." The Endurance dropped out of hyperspace 3 days later, and Morrison got his first look at the Allied fleet. The Valari ships were elegant things. All curved lines and gleaming silver hulls. They looked like works of art rather than weapons of war. The Sindari vessels were stranger, crystalline structures that seemed to glow from within. And then there were the 3 human ships, blocky and practical, looking like they had been built by people who cared more about function than beauty. Which, Morrison thought, was exactly what they were. The fleet commander was a Valari admiral named Torval. Morrison had never met a Valari in person before, but he had read about them. They were tall and slender, with skin that shifted colors based on their emotions and eyes that saw far more of the light spectrum than human eyes could. They lived for nearly 1,000 years, and they had a reputation for being calm, logical, and more than a little arrogant. The command briefing confirmed that reputation. Morrison stood in the holographic conference chamber aboard the Valari flagship, surrounded by alien commanders, who looked at him like he was a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. "The human vessels will take position at the rear of the formation," Torval said. His voice was musical, almost hypnotic, but there was no warmth in it. "You will provide support, fire, and assist with evacuation if necessary." Morrison kept his face neutral. "Admiral, the Endurance has significant combat capabilities. We could be more useful in a forward position." Torval's skin flickered with pale blue, which Morrison had read was a sign of dismissal. "Human ships are adequate for their purpose. But this battle requires experience and discipline. Your species has been traveling between stars for less than 2 centuries. My people have been fighting wars in space for longer than your civilization has existed. You will follow orders." There was nothing to say to that. Morrison nodded and returned to his ship. Katie Lawson was waiting for him in the corridor outside the shuttle bay. She fell into step beside him as he walked. "I heard the briefing through the tactical channel. They're putting us in the back." "They are. That's a waste. We have the fastest ships in the fleet. We could run circles around those Valari cruisers." Morrison smiled despite his frustration. "I know. But we're the new kids, Katie. We have to earn their respect. By hiding in the back while they fight, by doing whatever needs to be done when the time comes." They reached the bridge, and Morrison took his seat in the command chair. The view screen showed the assembled fleet, hanging in space like a wall of metal and crystal and light. Beyond them, at the edge of sensor range, the Kreth Armada was gathering, nearly 100 ships, bristling with weapons, crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. Morrison looked at his crew. Katie Lawson at Tactical, her fingers already dancing over her console as she analyzed enemy formations. Danny Reeves at Engineering, running diagnostics to make sure the ship was ready for anything. Sam Wright at Navigation, plotting courses and escape routes and attack vectors all at the same time. Megan Torres at Communications, monitoring every channel for any scrap of useful information. They were young, most of them. Humans always were, compared to the other species in the coalition. They lived fast and died young, at least by galactic standards. A human who reached 100 was considered ancient. A Valari of the same age was barely an adult. Maybe that was why the other species dismissed them. What could a species that lived such short lives possibly understand about war? About strategy? About sacrifice? Morrison thought about all the wars humanity had fought throughout its history. All the battles won against impossible odds. All the times his people had refused to surrender when any logical species would have accepted defeat. The Kreth fleet began to move, spreading out into attack formation. Weapons powered up across the coalition line. The battle for Valari Prime was about to begin. Commander Morrison leaned forward in his chair and spoke to his crew. Whatever happens out there, remember who we are. Remember what we're fighting for. Not just for the Valari, not just for the coalition, for everyone back home who's counting on us. For every human who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of being here. He took a deep breath and watched the enemy ships grow larger on the view screen. Let's show them what humanity can do. The first wave of Kreth ships hit the coalition line like a hammer striking glass. Energy beams lit up the darkness of space, and explosions bloomed silent and terrible against the stars. The Valari cruisers held their positions with perfect discipline, returning fire in precise, measured volleys. The Sindari ships sang their strange crystalline songs and launched weapons that bent light itself into deadly arcs. And in the back of the formation, the human ships waited. Commander Morrison watched the battle unfold on the tactical display. The coalition was holding, but barely. The Kreth had numbers on their side, and they were not afraid to spend lives to gain ground. For every enemy ship that fell, 2 more took its place. Commander, Katie Lawson said, her voice tight with tension. The Valari flagship is taking heavy fire. Their shield generators are failing. Morrison saw it on the display. Admiral Torval's ship, the Eternal Grace, was surrounded by enemy vessels. Its beautiful silver hull was scorched and torn. Escape pods were launching, but not fast enough. They're launching boarding pods, Lawson continued. The Kreth are going to take the ship. Morrison made his decision in less than a heartbeat. Helm, bring us about. Full speed toward the flagship. Sam Wright's hands flew across his console. Sir, that will put us directly in the enemy fire zone. I know. Do it anyway. The Endurance surged forward, breaking from the rear formation and racing toward the heart of the battle. Enemy weapons fire streaked past the hull, and the ship shook as a glancing blow struck the port side. Shields holding, Lawson reported. Barely. They reached the Eternal Grace, just as the first Kreth boarding pods attached to its hull. Morrison could see them through the view screen. Ugly metal cylinders punching through the elegant Valari armor, like parasites burrowing into flesh. Danny, Morrison said, turning to his chief engineer. Get your team together. We're going aboard. Danny Reeves grinned, though there was no humor in it. Thought you'd never ask, Commander. 5 minutes later, Reeves led a squad of 12 Marines through the airlock and into the Valari flagship. The corridors were filled with smoke and the sounds of weapons fire. Valari crew members lay wounded on the floor, their color-shifting skin pale with shock and pain. The Kreth were everything the reports had described. They were massive creatures, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick gray hide that could stop a low-powered energy blast. Their eyes glowed red in the dim emergency lighting, and they moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything they could not kill. They had never met human marines. Reeves raised his rifle and fired. The first Creeth fell with a hole in its chest. The second turned to face this new threat and caught 3 rounds in the face. The Marines moved forward in perfect coordination, each one covering the others, each one knowing exactly where their teammates were at every moment. "Push them back," Reeves shouted. "Don't give them an inch." The fighting was brutal and close. The Creeth were stronger, but the humans were faster and more aggressive. Every time the enemy tried to form a defensive line, the Marines broke through it. Every time a Creeth warrior thought it had cornered a human soldier, another Marine appeared from a different angle. On the bridge of the Endurance, Katie Lawson coordinated the battle from her tactical station. She tracked friendly and enemy positions, directed fire support, and somehow found time to help the Volari engineers restore auxiliary power to their crippled ship. "The main shield generator is gone," a Volari engineer told her through the communication channel. "We cannot repair it." "Then we work around it," Lawson replied. "What about the secondary systems? They were damaged in the initial attack. We would need to reroute power through the emergency grid, but the connections are not compatible with our standard equipment." Lawson thought for a moment. "Send me the specifications. Human equipment isn't as elegant as yours, but it's flexible. We might be able to make something work." She worked while the battle raged around them, pulling together spare parts and jury-rigged solutions that no Volari engineer would have considered. It was ugly and inelegant, but after 20 minutes of frantic effort, the auxiliary shields flickered to life. Inside the ship, Reeves and his Marines had pushed the Creeth back to the main boarding pod. The enemy commander, a massive brute with scars covering half its face, stood in the doorway and refused to retreat. "You fight well for prey," it growled in broken Coalition standard. "But you cannot win. More of us will come. Your kind will fall like all the others." Reeves didn't waste breath on a response. He charged. The two collided with bone-jarring force. The Creeth was stronger, but Reeves had spent his whole life fighting things bigger than him. He ducked under a crushing blow, drove his combat knife into the creature's side, and twisted. The Creeth roared in pain and rage, but Reeves held on, stabbing again and again until the light faded from those red eyes. When it was over, 300 Volari crew members were still alive. 2 human Marines were dead. Corporal Ben Hartley had taken an energy blast meant for a wounded Volari officer. Private Nicole Dunn had held a corridor alone for 4 minutes, while civilians evacuated, and she had died still firing her weapon. Reeves carried their bodies back to the Endurance himself. Admiral Torval met him at the airlock. The Volari commander looked different now. The arrogance was gone from his posture. His skin shifted through colors that Morrison's translator identified as respect, gratitude, and something like shame. "Your soldiers died for my people," Torval said. "We did not deserve such sacrifice." Reeves looked at the Admiral with eyes that had seen too much death. "No one deserves to die, sir. That's kind of the point." He saluted and walked away, leaving the Volari Admiral standing alone with questions he did not know how to answer. On the bridge, Morrison received reports from across the fleet. The battle was not going well. 4 Coalition ships were destroyed, and 6 more were badly damaged. The Creeth were still coming, wave after wave, and the defensive line was starting to crumble. But something had changed. The other species had seen what the humans had done. They had watched a small crew risk everything to save people who had dismissed them as children. They had seen human soldiers die for strangers without hesitation or complaint. For the first time since the battle began, the Coalition fleet felt like something more than just an alliance of convenience. It felt like a family. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the Coalition fleet was dying. Commander Morrison stood on the bridge of the Endurance and watched the tactical display with growing despair. The formation that had seemed so strong at the beginning of the fight was now full of gaps where ships used to be. The Volari had lost 4 cruisers. The Sindari had lost 3 of their crystalline vessels. And everywhere Morrison looked, there were more Creeth ships pouring into the system. "Commander," Katie Lawson said quietly, "the Sindari are calculating withdrawal vectors." Morrison nodded. He understood. Coalition doctrine was clear on this point. When a fleet lost more than 40% of its strength, retreat was not just permitted, but required. The mathematics of war said that staying would only add more deaths to an already lost cause, but retreat meant abandoning Valari Prime. It meant leaving billions of civilians to the mercy of the Kreth, who were not known for mercy. It meant running away while the enemy celebrated another victory. Morrison had never run from anything in his life. "Get me a fleet-wide channel," he said. Megan Torres worked her console and nodded. "Channel open, sir." Morrison took a deep breath and began to speak. He did not know if anyone would listen. He did not know if his words would make any difference. But he had to try. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the Earthship Endurance. I know what the tactical computers are saying. I know the doctrine calls for retreat, and I know that most of you think humans are too young and too inexperienced to understand war." He paused, letting his words sink in across the fleet. "But I've been watching this battle, and I've seen something the Kreth don't think we've noticed. They're supply ships. They're positioned behind their main battle line, barely protected, because they never expected anyone to get that close. Those ships carry their fuel, their ammunition, their replacement parts. Without them, the Kreth fleet has maybe 2 hours of full combat capability." The tactical display shifted as Lawson highlighted the enemy supply vessels. They were there, just as Morrison had said. A cluster of vulnerable targets hiding behind a wall of warships. "I'm proposing we don't retreat. I'm proposing we attack. Not a holding action. Not a fighting withdrawal. A full assault through their battle line. Straight at their supply ships." Silence on the channel. Morrison could imagine the alien commanders, staring at their displays, trying to understand what this crazy human was suggesting. "I know it sounds insane. I know coalition doctrine says this kind of attack is suicide. But the Kreth don't know human doctrine. They don't know that where we come from, attacking when you're outnumbered isn't insane." "It's Tuesday." A Sindari commander spoke, its voice translated through harmonic crystals into something Morrison's ears could understand. "The probability of success is less than 15%. The probability of total fleet destruction is over 60%. "I know the numbers," Morrison replied. "I also know that if we run today, the Kreth will chase us tomorrow. They'll hit another coalition world. And another. And another. Eventually there won't be anywhere left to run." More silence. Then, a new voice joined the channel. It was Admiral Torval. "I have served in the coalition fleet for over 700 years. I have fought in 32 major engagements. In all that time, I have never heard a battle plan so reckless, so foolish, or so completely human." Morrison's heart sank. "I also watched human soldiers die on my ship today," Torval continued. "They died saving people who had treated them with disrespect. They died without hesitation, without complaint, without asking anything in return. I do not understand humans. I am not sure anyone truly does. But I have learned something today that all my centuries of experience never taught me." The Admiral's voice grew stronger. "I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite fear. And I have never seen any species choose courage as consistently as humanity does." A long pause then. "The eternal grace will follow the endurance. I do not know if we will survive. But I know that I would rather die fighting alongside humans than live. Knowing, I abandoned them." One by one, the other ships signaled their agreement. The Sindari committed their remaining vessels. The battered Valari cruisers formed up behind their flagship. Even the 2 other human ships, the Resolute and the Defiant, moved into attack position despite their heavy damage. "All ships, this is Morrison. Attack formation Delta. We punch through their center. Hit those supply ships with everything we have. And then we make them regret ever coming to this system." Chief Engineer Ryan Castillo's voice came over the internal channel from the engine room. "Commander, if you want maximum speed, I can push the reactors past their rated limits. We'll probably burn them out within an hour. But we'll be the fastest thing in this system until then." "Do it," Morrison said. Navigator Ashley Vance plotted the course, her fingers steady despite the fear Morrison could see in her eyes. Course laid in, sir. 12% chance of survival. I've beaten worse odds, Morrison said. He was lying, but it sounded good. The fleet began to move. The Endurance led the way, her engines burning hot and bright as she accelerated toward the enemy line. Behind her came the Eternal Grace, her elegant hull scarred but unbroken. Behind them came the rest of the fleet, a ragged collection of damaged ships crewed by beings who had decided that some things were worth dying for. The Kreth commander saw them coming. Morrison watched the enemy fleet shift, trying to understand what was happening. They had never seen anything like this. No sane species attacked into superior numbers. No logical commander threw away a fleet on a desperate gamble. But humans had never claimed to be sane. And sometimes, Morrison thought, logic was overrated. All weapons charged and ready, Lawson reported. Shields at maximum, called out another officer. Engine output at 120% and climbing, Castillo added from engineering. Morrison gripped the arms of his command chair and watched the enemy ships grow larger on the view screen. In a few minutes, they would either break through to victory or die in the cold vacuum of space. Either way, the galaxy would remember this day. All ships, Morrison said, his voice calm despite his racing heart. Attack! The Endurance plunged into the heart of the enemy fleet, and the universe held its breath. The charge into the Kreth formation was the longest 10 minutes of Commander Morrison's life. Enemy fire came from every direction at once. The shields of the Endurance flared and sparked as beam after beam struck home. The ship shook with impacts that threw crew members from their stations. Alarms screamed warnings about hull breaches and failing systems. Forward shields down to 30%. Katie Lawson shouted over the noise. We can't take much more of this. Keep pushing, Morrison replied. We stop now. We die for nothing. Around them, the fleet was suffering. A Valari cruiser exploded off the port bow, its elegant hull torn apart by concentrated fire. A Sindari vessel shattered into a million crystalline fragments that sparkled like deadly snowflakes in the darkness. But they were moving forward. Somehow, against all odds, the coalition fleet was cutting through the enemy line. The Kreth had never seen anything like it. Their commanders had expected the coalition to retreat or surrender. Instead, these mad aliens were driving straight into the heart of their formation, taking losses that should have broken any fleet, and refusing to stop. Ensign Chris Holt led the damage control teams through the burning corridors of the Endurance. He was young, barely 23, but he had trained for this his whole career. When a plasma conduit ruptured on Deck 7, he was there with fire suppressant and emergency patches. When the forward section lost atmosphere, he sealed the bulkheads and rerouted life support without missing a beat. Deck 4 is venting, one of his team reported. We've got wounded trapped in Section 12. Then we get them out, Holt said. He grabbed his toolkit and ran toward the danger. Because that was what humans did. On the bridge, Morrison saw the supply ships growing larger on the view screen. They were close now. So close he could almost taste victory. But between them and their target stood a wall of Kreth warships, and the coalition fleet was running out of ships. Commander, Megan Torres said, her voice breaking slightly. The Resolute is reporting critical damage. Captain Grant is requesting permission to break formation. Morrison looked at the tactical display. The Resolute was a burning wreck, her engines failing, her weapons barely functional. She should have been falling back, looking for a way to survive. Instead, she was accelerating. Captain Lucas Grant's voice came over the communication channel. It was calm, almost peaceful. Despite the chaos Morrison could hear in the background. Morrison, my ship is done. We've got maybe 5 minutes before the reactor goes critical. But we've still got thrust. And we've still got a hull. Morrison understood immediately. Lucas, no. There has to be another way. There isn't. And we both know it. That Kreth carrier is blocking your path to the supply ships. We're going to move it for you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. And if you wanted the giving, thanks for watching. There isn't another for you. Your crew. My crew volunteered. Every single one of them. We talked about it, and we all agreed. This is what we came out here to do, Jake. This is what humans do. Morrison wanted to argue. He wanted to find another option. Another path. Another way that didn't end with 400 people dying in a deliberate collision. But there was no time. And Grant was right. It's been an honor serving with you, Lucas. Same to you, Commander. Give them hell. The Resolute turned toward the Kreth carrier. Her damaged engines flared with everything they had left. The enemy ship tried to move. Tried to bring its weapons to bear. But it was too slow and too large. The collision was silent in the vacuum of space, but Morrison felt it in his soul. The Resolute struck the carrier amidships, and both ships vanished in a ball of white-hot fire. 400 human lives, traded for one enemy vessel and a clear path to victory. The route is open, Lawson said quietly. There were tears on her cheeks, but her voice was steady. Targeting supply ships now. The Endurance and what remained of the fleet poured through the gap. Weapons fire lit up the supply vessels, tearing through their thin hulls like paper. Fuel tanks exploded. Ammunition stores detonated in chains of secondary blasts. Within minutes, the Kreth logistics train was nothing but expanding clouds of debris. In the medical bay, Dr. Stephanie Marsh worked without rest. The wounded came in waves, humans and Valari and Sindari alike. She had trained in human medicine. But today she was learning anatomy on the fly. Adapting techniques. Improvising solutions. A Valari officer lay on her table, bleeding from a wound that should have been fatal. Marsh had never operated on a Valari before. She had no idea where the major blood vessels were or how their organs were arranged, but she could see the wound, and she could see the blood. And she knew that doing something was better than doing nothing. Hold still, she told the officer. I'm going to try something. It might hurt. I trust you, the Valari said weakly. You are human. You do not give up. Marsh didn't give up. The surgery took 2 hours, and she invented at least 3 new procedures along the way. But when it was over, the Valari officer was stable. On the bridge, Morrison watched the Kreth fleet begin to falter. Without supplies, their ships were running dry. Weapons fire slowed, then stopped. Engines flickered and died as fuel reserves ran out. The Kreth commander broadcast a message to the coalition fleet. His voice was filled with disbelief and something that might have been respect. You have won this day, humans, but this is not over. The Dominion will remember what happened here. We will come for you. Quote. Morrison leaned forward and replied with 3 words. We'll be waiting. The Kreth fleet began to withdraw, limping away on whatever power they had left. A ragged cheer went up across the coalition fleet, in dozens of languages, from species who had fought and bled together. The battle for Valari Prime was over. Morrison slumped back in his chair and looked at the cost. 2 human ships destroyed, 412 human lives lost. The Endurance herself was barely holding together, her forward section gone, her engines running on fumes. But Valari Prime was safe. Billions of lives had been saved. And for the first time in coalition history, a fleet had turned certain defeat into impossible victory. Katie Lawson sat down beside her commander. We did it, she said softly. We did, Morrison agreed. Now comes the hard part. What's that? Morrison looked at the list of casualties scrolling across his display. Each name was a person, a story, a life that would never continue, remembering what it cost. The ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of Valari Prime, a building that had stood for over 10,000 years. Its walls had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the signing of treaties that shaped the galaxy, and moments of triumph and tragedy beyond counting. But the Valari who gathered there said that nothing in all those millennia compared to what they were about to witness. For the first time in recorded history, the Star of Eternal Valor would be given to warriors who were not Valari. Commander Morrison stood at attention in his dress uniform, flanked by the surviving officers of the Endurance. Katie Lawson was beside him, along with Danny Reeves, Sam Wright, and the others who had fought and survived. Behind them stood representatives from the Resolute and the Defiant, wearing the medals of their fallen comrades on chains around their necks. Admiral Torval walked slowly to the podium at the front of the hall. His skin shifted through colors that the human translators struggled to interpret: grief, pride, wonder, and something new that the Valari language had no word for. "I have commanded fleets for 7 centuries, Torval began. "I have studied warfare since before the ancestors of these humans learned to build cities. I believed that I understood courage, sacrifice, and honor. I was wrong." He turned to face the human delegation. "When this battle began, I dismissed humanity as children playing at war. I placed their ships at the rear of the formation, because I did not believe they could contribute anything meaningful. I was arrogant, and I was foolish, and I was completely, utterly mistaken." The hall was silent. Thousands of Valari, Sindari, and beings from a dozen other coalition species listened to their admiral speak words that would have been unthinkable just days ago. "I watched human soldiers board my burning ship to save my crew. I watched human engineers perform miracles with tools that should not have worked. I watched human pilots fly into certain death without hesitation. And I watched a human captain ram his crippled ship into an enemy carrier so that others might live." Torval paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "We have always measured the worth of a species by how long they live, how much they have accomplished, how many centuries they have traveled the stars. By those measures, humanity is barely a footnote in galactic history. But I have learned that those measures are wrong." He looked directly at Morrison. "Humans live short lives by our standards. Perhaps that is why they burn so brightly. They know that every moment is precious, that every choice matters, that there is no time to waste on fear or doubt or hesitation. They love fiercely because they know that love can end. They fight desperately because they know that life is fragile. They never surrender because they refuse to waste a single heartbeat of their brief existence." Admiral Torval stepped forward and placed the Star of Eternal Valor around Morrison's neck. The metal was old, impossibly old. A piece of crystallized starlight that had been forged when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. "Commander Jake Morrison, on behalf of the Valari people and the Galactic Coalition, I thank you. You and your crew have shown us what courage truly means." Morrison accepted the honor with a simple nod. He thought about all the things he could say, all the speeches he could give, all the ways he could try to explain what humanity was really about, but in the end, he just said what was in his heart. "We didn't do anything special. We just did what humans do. When someone needs help, we help. When someone can't fight, we fight for them. When everyone says something is impossible, we do it anyway." He looked out at the assembled crowd of alien faces. Every human who died in this battle knew the risks. They came anyway, not because they weren't afraid, but because they knew that fear is no excuse for inaction. He paused, and his voice grew quiet. "We lost good people out there." Ben Hartley was 26 years old. He had a daughter back on Earth who he'll never see grow up. Nicole Dunn enlisted the day she turned 18 because she wanted to make a difference. Lucas Grant and the crew of the Resolute had families, friends, futures that they gave up so that strangers could live. Morrison straightened his shoulders. "Don't honor us with medals and ceremonies. Honor them by remembering. Honor them by being the kind of people they believed the galaxy could become." In the days that followed, word of the battle spread across Coalition space. The story of human courage became a legend, passed from species to species, world to world. Young warriors from 100 planets requested transfers to human ships. Diplomatic missions asked for human advisors. Scientists wanted to study the human mind, to understand how such a short-lived species could produce such extraordinary determination. Danny Reeves found himself surrounded by admirers wherever he went. A young Valari soldier approached him one evening, barely out of training by the look of him. "Sergeant Reeves," the young alien said. "May I ask you a question?" "Sure, kid. What do you want to know?" "What is it like to fight alongside humans?" Reeves thought about it for a long moment. He thought about Ben Hartley and Nicole Dunn. He thought about the boarding action on the Valari flagship, about holding the line while the civilians evacuated. He thought about Captain Grant and the crew of the Resolute, flying into certain death with a joke on their lips and steel in their hearts. Scary, he finally said. But in a good way. Humans are scared just like everyone else. The difference is, we fight anyway. We make jokes when things are bad. We cry when we lose friends. We keep going when every logical part of our brain says we should give up. He smiled at the young Valari. Fighting alongside humans isn't about glory or victory. It's about knowing that no matter what happens, the person next to you will never leave you behind. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself. The young soldier asked to serve with humans. It was the first of thousands of such requests. Katie Lawson stood on the observation deck of the Endurance, watching the stars. The ship was still being repaired, but her crew remained aboard, unable to imagine being anywhere else. A Valari ensign joined her, one she had worked with during the battle. Lieutenant Lawson, the ensign said. My grandfather told me that humans were too young to matter in this galaxy. He said your species would fade away before you made any real impact. Lawson smiled. And what do you think? The ensign was quiet for a moment, his skin shifting through colors of deep blue and gold. I think I will tell my grandchildren that fighting alongside humanity was the greatest honor of my life. Across the coalition, a saying began to spread. Warriors whispered it to each other before battle. Diplomats used it to describe their most trusted allies. Children learned it in school alongside the names of ancient heroes. Fighting alongside humanity brings glory and admiration across the stars. The humans, for their part, simply continued being human. They laughed and cried and fought and loved. They reached out to strangers with open hands and defended the helpless with everything they had. They lived their short, bright lives with a passion that longer-lived species could only wonder at. And the galaxy was better for it.